John, thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's really
That's
good
okay.
to see you again.
Happy to see you.
John, maybe by way of a kick-off, you could just talk us through your early career and your route into Really Simple Systems, the business you founded.
Right. Well, actually, a fact that I don't really acknowledge is I started off life as a chartered accountant and then moved sideways into becoming a programmer and from that into a salesperson. But really, I spent most of my life running software companies. And my formative experience was 15 years in a company called Systems Union that had an accounting product called Sun Systems, which was a really good product in its day. And we built that from 5 people in a small house in Camden to 100 million turnover in 15 years. And that was just a hell of a lot of fun and a really, really good ride. And then after that, I became CEO of 3 companies in a row, doing turnarounds, which was profitable but a lot less fun. And it was after the last of those turnarounds, which was a software company in Cambridge, I really decided to go and start my own company on the basis that when I was with Systems Union, it was all good news. It was a company we grew from scratch. There was no legacy product or investors, and it could just be fun every day. And I wanted to get back into that small company growth mode and start my own business. I also wanted, at that stage of life, I already knew that this was a company that I was going to grow and sell, and that was going to be my exit route from day one.
Right. So you did that right from the very get-go.
Yep, absolutely. It was.
What drove that decision making? I mean, what was kind of behind that? Was it your experiences in working with businesses that had?
Well, the decision to go for an exit from day one.
Yeah, so the decision to build a company with a mind to exit. What was behind that rationale?
What was behind it was to have an asset at the end of the period that was worth money that I could sell, and that would fund my retirement.
So did that shape the type of business that you did?
I looked at all sorts of different types of businesses. One of the things that I thought about doing was, as I'd spent all my life in software companies, maybe I should do something else that wasn't software at all, just for a change. But I decided in the end that starting a business is pretty tough, and maybe I should do something that I actually had some level of skill in doing before. So I was stuck with software. And then I looked around and what type of software and cloud products were just coming on the market in those days. A CRM was quite a new idea in the cloud marketplace. So I decided to go with cloud CRM.
Yeah. So that was a Really Simple Systems software as a service.
Software as a service. So, back in those days, most of the customers would say, they're worried about cloud. Is it safe? Will it work? And by the time, roll on 15 years, nobody's asking any more questions about is cloud safe. Cloud is very accepted. That's the good news. The bad news is that whereas when I started, there was probably 2 other competitors in the world who had a cloud CRM system, there were hundreds.
Right. And so who was aware of your plan, essentially your long-term plan, as you were growing the business to eventually exit?
So one of the decisions I took early on was not to have a partner, which was possibly quite unusual. But I found that if you're building a business to sell, and particularly if it's your own business and you're looking at taking the money out of the business in a most tax efficient way, then there can be conflicts of interest if you have a partner, because they might have different timescales or different financial requirements. So one of the things to start with, for instance, was that, for the first 2 years, I didn't pay myself a salary because the business wasn't making any money. I could do that if I'd had a partner. Maybe they couldn't have done that. So I decided not to have a partner. So the only decision really was from myself.
Yeah. And did you talk to your friends, family about your plan?
Well, I certainly talked to my wife. Who had to sort of take the gamble with me that I was going to chuck in a PAYE job and start my own business. But otherwise, and then I discussed the types of business that I might go into with some business friends of mine. But in the end, really, it was self-driven.
Did you have, whilst you were building up the business then with this plan in mind, did you have a vision in your head as to what the business would look like at the point at which you you were hoping to sell it essentially.
Yes. So obviously when one starts and you start putting the numbers into the spreadsheet, you have an idea of what it's going to look like in 10 years' time, which is it's going to be worth an absolutely huge fortune in 6 years' time. Of course, the reality then arrives, and after 15 years, it's not even worth what you thought it would be in the end, but it's still worth a reasonable amount of money.
So at what point did you decide that the time had come to start exploring an exit?
So probably about 10 years in, I started making a list of people that I thought would be potential acquirers and trying to make, well, not tentative overtures, but at least letting them know that I existed. Also, around about that stage, I started getting unsolicited offers in, people who were interested in mainly hoovering up small businesses that were generating cash that they would like to buy.
Yeah, I mean, that's very common in software, isn't it?
Yeah, with either a particular customer base or a particular product, and they were looking at roll-ups, really. They're all roll-ups, so they're looking to buy small SaaS companies for a multiple of, say, 2 or 3 revenues, and then build a larger company that they could sell for a multiple of 5 revenues without really adding any value. So you talk to a number of those people, and most of them were rubbish, and some of them were actually seriously interesting, but none of them actually came to fruition.
So you explored these on your own at the time?
Yeah, so I would just take the calls. I had a non-executive director who I appointed as a chairman, who had been through more sales and acquisitions than I had. He was very useful in those conversations, Peter Osborne. But mainly I just took them on by myself. If they'd ever got to the stage that they were actually interested in making an offer, then I probably would have hired an advisor to help me, but not at that stage. Never really got to term sheet stage.
At what point did you decide that the time is right to appoint an advisor?
So after a number of these conversations that had come to nothing, because I was coming up to my 70th birthday, I thought, well, now is the time. It's not happening organically. I need to actually make it happen.
So were you under any other pressures externally in terms of timing?
No, so I had no other external investors. I had no bank debt. I had no pressure to sell now as opposed to later, apart from my own timescale. I was coming up to 70 years old. I thought, well, it is time. I need to move on. I need to have time to have a decent retirement and enjoy the fruits of my labor. So if it's not happening, or what I call organically, in other words, somebody coming to me and making an irresistible offer, then I need to make it happen myself. What I did is I spent 3 months interviewing potential M&A advisors and made a short list or 2. I talked to people in the UK. I talked to people in the US, all sorts of different people with quite different ideas as to how to sell the company. Some of them were just companies that would sell any business. They just had a mailing list. You could be a scrap metal merchant. They would just punt out it's like the exchange and mart for companies that they wouldn't really add much value.
Exchange and mart dates you a little bit, John.
Well, it does date me a little bit, but there you go. eBay, maybe. Came down to a short list of 2, Peter Osborne, non-exec director, and myself. Interviewed the final 2, and CapEQ, it was just obviously the best.
Obviously, thank you. What surprised you about the process?
So one of the things that surprised me, and this was surprising earlier on when I was getting these unsolicited inquiries about selling the business, was the types of businesses that were interested in acquiring me were all businesses I'd never heard of. If you're in my particular software space, you think you know everybody else in the software space, and you think you understand who might be interested in acquiring you. And all the people, both before we actually started the formal process and during the formal process, all the people that were actually interested were both companies that A, I'd never heard of, and B, weren't necessarily in an industry that I would have thought would have been interested in acquiring me. So having a very wide range of companies that might be interested in purchasing you was absolutely key. And that, I think CapEQ did in the research phase. They knew more about that than I did. And and looked for businesses and sectors that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of would have been potential acquirers.
And that was true of the eventual acquirer as well, wasn't
and that was true of the eventual acquirer. Well, I'd never heard of the company, and I might have, now that you mention it, see what the product fit would be, but they wouldn't have been on my list to start with.
As you were reaching the end of the process and you realized that the transaction was likely to happen, what in your head did that look like what you thought it was going to look like in the years that you'd been building up to this?
Yes, in the end, or when you were coming up to the end, the kind of deal that I was looking for was there. Obviously, it would have been nice if there was twice the amount of money, but the amount of money involved was quite acceptable. And the key things for me, really, which we made very plain to all potential acquirers, two things really. One was that it was going to be all cash on the day, no retention. And the other one was that I was going to leave the company immediately. They weren't looking for me to do an earn out or a workout or stay 6 months and continue to run the company.
Yeah.
The whole point was I was going to retire.
Yes, and we made that very clear, didn't we, throughout, really,
Yeah.
which I think set the expectation and the tone.
Yeah. And that probably would have ruled out some acquirers, but that was what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And at that point, as you were looking to the next stage of your life without the business, what did it look like then, and what does it look like now?
Oh, what it looks like now is absolutely wonderful. I really can't imagine how I could possibly fit a day job in anymore. Once you've actually taken the plunge and retired. A lot of people ask the question, oh, don't you miss the camaraderie in the office? Don't you miss a focus in life? And the answer is, hell no. I'm having a very nice time. I'm doing all the classic corny things that retired people do, which is traveling around the world, looking after grandchildren. I also have a series of hobbies, all of which could absorb me completely. Playing in a band, playing in my woodworking shop with all sorts of toys, and my life is completely full.
Is there anything you thought that you'd be doing that you're not doing, and anything perhaps you didn't think you'd be doing that you now are?
No, not really. I don't think so.
So it's all absolutely as you pictured it.
I'm doing exactly what I pictured. What I didn't realize was how much I would enjoy it and how much I wouldn't miss running a business.
Interesting. You did mention to me earlier that you're doing a bit of mentoring for people who are founding their own business.
Yeah, so I'm mentoring with two academic establishments at the moment. The London School of Economics, that produces very bright, motivated young graduates who are looking to start their first business. And then also the City of London University, which has a program for disadvantaged people, or people from a disadvantaged background who are looking to get their first job. So two different types of mentoring, but that's really interesting.
And do you feel like that gives you some of the fulfillment that you perhaps used to get when you were running a business?
Yes, but it's not something I'm necessarily looking for. I'm not doing it because I feel that there's a lack in my life. I'm doing it because a mixture of, corny reasons like, you want to put something back into the world. And for my interest, it's very inspiring talking to young people who are starting from scratch, who've got these bright ideas, and you're just trying to persuade them to not make all the mistakes that you made when you were in their position at their age. And it's interesting, but it's not. If I didn't have it, it wouldn't feel the lack.
Okay, so from the unique vantage point that you're at now, having built a business and achieved an exit, as you look back, what surprised you about going through the process, and what advice would you give people who are thinking about doing it?
So everybody that's ever been involved in one of these transactions or been close to one of these transactions knows that it is actually a painful process to go through, particularly when you get to the end and the lawyers are arguing about the finer points of warranties and guarantees. And the amount of work that's involved You've heard, that there's an awful lot of work. A lot of it is repetitive. It's very tedious. But when you actually have to do it, you realize how repetitive and how tedious it is. So is that, but you just got to keep your eye on the goal and just grind through.
Yeah. Would you have done anything differently with hindsight?
Not a lot, I don't think. No. Well, yes, the one thing I would have done, well, probably what my wife would have said is, well, why didn't you do this 5 years earlier?
And what do you answer when she said?
And the answer is, well, you're probably right.
Good. What's the one thing that no one tells you when you're setting up a business?
I don't know that people don't tell you this. I think, having started a couple of businesses myself, both for other people and my own, is that you all know it's going to take longer than you think to actually get the revenue to where it's going to be or break even. But actually, it'll be much longer than you think.
And was it worth it?
It was certainly worth it, yeah.
Good. John, thanks for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Nice talking to you, Doug.